Hey, good afternoon, y'all, and welcome to this chapter 2 reading of Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality. We're glad and excited to be here with y'all, getting this reading in. As always, if you're new, the PDF for the reading is in the pinned section of the Discord if you're here for the live reading. And as always, if you're listening to this on the YouTube, the pinned reading is going to be in the description. So without further ado, let's get started with chapter 2 of Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality.
Freedom of the press belongs to the man who owns one. In the United States, we have been taught wealth and power are widely distributed among a broad middle class. But as noted earlier, most American institutions, be they hospitals, museums, universities, businesses, banks, scientific laboratories, or mass media, are not owned and controlled by the middle class, but by a relatively small number of corporate rich. When trying to understand the content and purposes of the media, this pattern of ownership takes on special significance. The moneyed media. Freedom of the press, A.J. Liebling once said, is for those who own the press. Is for those who own the presses. Who specifically owns the mass media in the United States? 10 businesses and financial corporations control the 3 major television and radio networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, 34 subsidiary television stations, 201 cable TV systems, 62 radio stations, 20 record companies, 59 magazines including Time and Newsweek, 58 newspapers including the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Los Angeles Times, 41 book publishers, and various motion picture companies like Columbia Pictures and 20th Century Fox. 3/4 of the major stockholders of ABC, CBS, and NBC are banks such as the Chase Manhattan, Morgan Guarantee, or Morgan Guarantee Trust, I think, Citibank, and Bank of America. The overall pattern is one of increasing concentration of ownership and earnings. According to a 1982 Los Angeles Times survey, independent daily newspapers are being gobbled up by the chains at the rate of 50 or 60 a year. 10 newspaper chains earn over half of all newspaper revenues in this country. 5 media conglomerates share 95% of the records and tapes market, which Warner's and CBS alone controlling 65% of the market. 8 Hollywood studios account for 89% of U.S. feature film rentals. 3 television networks earn over 2/3 of total U.S. television revenues. 7 paperback publishers dominate the quote-unquote mass market of books. Wait, no, not quote-unquote, sorry. Of the existing quote-unquote independent television and radio stations, 80% are network affiliates. Practically the only shows these quote-unquote independents produce are the local evening newscasts, the rest of their time being devoted to network programs. Most of the remaining stations are affiliated with the Public Broadcasting System, PBS, which receives almost all its money from the federal government and from corporate donors and their foundations, with a smaller share from listener subscriptions. In the newspaper world, the giant chains buy up not only independent papers but also other chains. Most of the large circulation dailies are owned by chains like Newhouse, Knight Ridder, and Gannett. In its 1978 annual report, Gannett described itself as a nationwide newspaper company with 78 dailies in 30 states. Less than 4% of American cities have competing newspapers under separate ownership. And in cities where there is a choice, where there is a quote-unquote choice, the newspapers offer little variety in editorial policy, being mostly conservative. Most of the quote-unquote independents rely on wire services and big circulation papers for syndicated columnists and for national and international coverage. Like television stations, they are independent more in name than content. As with any business, the mass media's first obligation is to make money for their owners. and they do that very well. Although declining in numbers, newspapers continue to be a major profit-making business in the United States, employing over 432,000 people. Through mergers, packaged news service, union busting, and staff cutting, the larger conglomerates show handsome profits. The annual advertising revenues of newspapers in the United States, $15.6 billion in 1980, continue to top that of television and radio combined. The press can hardly be critical of high corporation profits when it enjoys a rate of return on investment equal to or higher than that enjoyed by most oil companies. The same pattern of high profits holds for television. In 1980, the three networks netted an all-time high of $8.8 billion from advertising revenues. Corporations underwrite almost all primetime shows, both on public and commercial television. Like other businesses, the media corporations are diversified and multinational, controlling film, television, and radio outlets throughout Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, as well as Europe and North America. In recent years, independent publishing houses have been bought up by giant corporations who place a great emphasis on mass-market books and profits. Thus, Simon & Schuster is owned by Gulf and Western, and Putnam by MCA. Other big corporations like Litton, IBM, Raytheon, Xerox, and major oil companies are acquiring media properties. It is beyond belief that most of the books in the racks a few years hence may be chosen for you, like the television programs by Mobil, Exxon, and the rest. That was in quotes, I should have said that. Many newspapers, magazines, networks, and movie studios are themselves giant corporations or subsidiaries of corporate conglomerates. Consider Time magazine, whose editors, according to one ex-Time reporter, have never been shy about its incestuous relations with the captains of industry. Time, along with Fortune, Sports Illustrated, Money, Life, and Discover, is owned by Time Inc., colossal multinational corporation with revenues of $2.5 billion. Time Inc., who also owns Time Life Books, Little Brown & Co., the Book of the Month Club, and large interests in publishing firms in Germany, France, Mexico, and Japan. In addition, Time Inc. owns Temple Industries, making it one of the biggest landowners in the United States. It also owns a marketing data company, a television station in Michigan, Inland Container Corporation, Home Box Office, American Television, and Communications Corporation, and Pioneer Press, which publishes suburban Chicago newspapers. Who's at the top? The networks, newspapers, magazines, and movie companies are run like all other corporations in the United States by boards of directors composed mostly of persons drawn from the moneyed stratum of society. Representatives of the more powerful New York banks sit on the board of major networks and control network fiduciary and debt financing functions. Many directors of radio, television, newspapers, and publishing companies are also partners or directors of banks, insurance companies, big law firms, universities, and foundations. Overall, the directors of media corporations, quote, are linked with powerful businesses, organizations, not with public interest groups, with management, not labor, with well-established think tanks and charities, not their grassroots counterparts, unquote. Thus, the Ford Motor Company, already exercising a palpable influence on American society with an annual business of $43 billion, has directors on the corporate boards of New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times. At the local level, the pattern is the same, quote, almost any newspaper is part of the establishment of any city, unquote, observes Los Angeles Times reporter William Trombley. The same could be said of most local radio and television stations. This means that the paper has natural sympathies with business interests and other vested interests in the community. Independence and integrity are weakened further when newspaper executives accept positions on boards of directors, whether corporate boards or groups as seemingly innocent as Boy Scouts.
So, interesting point. It's now the Mormon Church who runs the Boy Scouts.
Oh my
Is it?
gosh.
Who has it been historically?
I guess it's been media executives.
Oh man, that's funny.
But yeah, no, it's the Mormon Church now, and that is creepy as hell.
Well, yeah,
Shit.
yeah.
Anyway,
Thank
Oh,
progressives, Mormon Church.
also, yeah, you can have us break for discussion at any time if you need to catch your breath. So,
Yeah, yeah. What are some of your thoughts on the reading that we've had so far, Zoe? Because I know you've read this before. You're probably the most excited to read Event Reality.
I mean, I think it just kind of deserves re-emphasizing. As with any business, the mass media's first obligation is to make money for their owners. I mean, that's the whole crux of it right there.
yeah.
Oh, you're talking about how CNN will clearly spin things in a different in a particular direction, for example, because they know that the story needs to be told in a way that doesn't hurt the bottom line, and obviously, at worst, and often as the case is, in a way that actually generates some profit.
Yeah, and it isn't just about what the public will swallow. In upcoming sections, Parenti is going to talk about the role of advertisers in getting content killed if they don't like it. And they actually exert a major sensorial influence on media.
Like my first engagement with this, like with the reality we're talking about here, was probably during the 2016 election. So, and let me see if I can find an article on it after I get done making the point. But like, I'd read an article at the time where, despite having a surge in popularity at about the same rate, Bernie Sanders was getting about 100 times less the air coverage than Donald Trump had been, and it was like solely at the time theorized that, well, it was totally about reasons of like Donald Trump driving ratings in a way that Bernie Sanders was said not to drive them. But Bernie got, I wouldn't say as much airtime as Trump in 2020 or in 2019, but he definitely ended up getting way more airtime than he did in 2016. And the case seemed to be that, like, what the media was even trying to get from its coverage, like, the goal changed, because the goal itself seemed to be to manufacture enough consent to, like, get Trump up out of there. And if, like, they needed to, acquiesce to, like, Bernie even a little bit in terms of giving him the coverage, there at least seemed to be some section of, like, the bourgeois who were, like, more comfortable with Bernie this time around than they had been in 2016. Because, as we all know, he still doesn't fundamentally change the power structure. And at the end of the day,
Yeah, I mean, Bernie laid right down for the Biden campaign, so we know he was only ever a barking dog.
exactly.
But did you
Exactly.
have a chance to finish reading chapter 1, the section that you weren't here for?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, because Parenti was getting into the function of different media coverage for political candidates, and how there's basically a conspiracy of silence against third party candidates, even though they may get millions of votes, they're still kept off the airwaves.
Oh, yeah.
Ah, dang it. He got logged off. So hopefully TN will be back in a sec. So Saber asks, how do you think inventing reality would apply to social media? The corporations themselves seek to maximize profit, and that seems to stem predominantly from advertisers. So with social media, it's a little different animal. The way they obtain their advertising revenue is by harvesting your data and selling it to marketers. But also, all major social media platforms have algorithms that censor certain content and will remove it automatically from the platform. Also, other algorithms that will boost other content and spread it faster to drive narratives that the platform finds useful. I think I've posted a link to this study a couple times. So this paper is called Researchers Develop Faster Way to Replace Bad Data with Accurate Information It is a research project from North Carolina State University in partnership with the Army Research Office. And they have demonstrated a new model of how competing pieces of information spread in online social networks. And the findings could be used to disseminate accurate information more quickly, displacing false information about anything from computer security to public health, or about other things such as, war crimes and, communist agitation. So that link will be in the video description as well. Crap, I hope we get TN back. Oh, there we go.
I didn't even know I wasn't still here. That's wild.
Hey, we were worried about you.
Yeah, for like a solid 2.5, 3 minutes. How long have I been gone?
Yeah, about 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh, god damn it. All right. Basically, I was responding to your point. Contradictory articles I had read from Vox and Vice, where one had argued that the Greens overperformed in 2020. So, like, what does that necessarily say about what the intended narrative is, or what the intention between running like contradictory stories like that, as far as the media is concerned? Like, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to like manufacture like confusion about what the conditions even are for dissent to rise up? Is it just the case that like there's different factions of the bourgeois with different interests? Like, what do you feel like is happening?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I mean, Vice and Fox have two totally separate, customer bases. You said Vice was the one that said the Green Party did better than their media share?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so Vice was originally an alternative publication, and it's still trying to hold on to that same audience and, present itself as more of a grassroots publication, even though it's owned by A&E and Disney now. So because that's their audience, they want to play up this story of, the underdog who's, rising against the establishment and in spite of this conspiracy of silence against them. And, it makes their audience feel good, even though nothing is being accomplished in reality. And the Fox News demographic, they're more conservative leaning. So they want to believe that if everyone just shut up about these fringe candidates, that no one would vote for them.
Yeah, that's true. But like, they were mentioning 3%, and I'm like, man, 3% sounds fucking high. Like that doesn't, like, that wasn't my perspective. They didn't seem to be getting anywhere near 3%, and I'm sure as hell never heard like any non-green or I guess non-libertarian party candidate ever mentioned, not even once. Like, sure as hell no mention of Gloria LaRiva on fucking Fox of all places. Like, to the extent they would have mentioned her, we already know where that would have leaned. That had just been a smear. So I don't. Yeah, I'm gonna do more research into that because I would like to know what the third party share. Because there are people whose whole goal politically now for a better world is this idea of like third party viability, and it'll be interesting to see like where that's trending, and like if the media environment now could ever even like foster the environment that would allow for a path for third party viability. Because necessarily speaking, like bourgeois electoralism is just not the way. But like also a lot of our class right now is focused on bourgeois electoralism. So like it's not too strategic to like totally disengage from that process, even if the process we know is like not gonna work. So like it's really hard to like find what the fuck we're even supposed to do to engage meaningfully, knowing that like that strategy is not gonna work. It's like, do we just wait on the class to come to that realization? Like, I don't know.
Well, we don't wait. We have to get out there and, start moving the class ourselves.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, like I always say, the revolution wasn't built by Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin alone. It was built by, 10,000 babushkins.
Yeah, a bunch of motherfuckers you never heard of. Literally. Like, you don't even know the most revolutionary people. Because, like, the idea that, like, Lenin and, like, all the other, like, famous communist leaders of all time were, like, the most revolutionary, like, no, I always said the foot soldiers, in my opinion, are the most revolutionary because they're the ones willing to actually go out there and be on the front lines of the shit, So
Yeah, I mean, the Russian Revolution was kicked off by just, these rank and file workers. I mean, it was the Women's Textile Workers Union who started the February Revolution, because it was International Women's Day and there weren't any demonstrations planned. But the women workers launched a wildcat strike, and the Metal Workers Union decided that they had to go out and support them. And that's how, with all the major Bolshevik leadership either in jail or in exile, the February Revolution still happened.
wow.
Yeah. Anyway, Comrade Dictionary made a good point. He says, I think it's also not likely that these sorts of systems are exactly controlled to that degree. It's more like the people who unconsciously are likely to pick and or write stories that are beneficial to the ruling class are the ones who get those jobs. Yeah, absolutely. Journalists are hired by these, publications based off their portfolio, and the ones whose, existing work is more in line with the publication's mission statement, or, its internal culture, not even its public facing, mission statement. Those are the guys who get the job. And Parenti goes into that later. So Kami Rice continues, like, it's controlled, no doubt, but I don't even know that it's a system where like a super guy even needs to say, quote, don't talk about Gloria La Riva, unquote. And yeah, absolutely not. I mean, the journalists, the rank and file journalists, are mostly self-censoring. And I would be surprised if the ones who work for Fox News even know that Gloria La Riva exists. Tommy Ray says, sorry, I meant super rich guy. I thought you meant just like a supervisor at the publication. So Tommy Rice concludes, it's just that the editors and stuff that get hired are likely to ignore her on their own. And yeah, that's exactly right. And that's something that will be brought up in detail in future chapters.
And didn't he also mention that in the first chapter about how like the vast majority of reporters are like it's almost entirely white guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a little more diversity now, but I mean, it's still the same issue.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
it's only a little more diverse. It's not like
Yeah, but there's no
yeah,
diversity of perspective, though. Like, not at all.
exactly. You can be as much of a, non-man of color as you want. Just, toe the corporate line and you'll be
Yeah,
accepted ish.
drop the, make the drone pilot a woman. That's that logic.
yeah.
All right. Did we finish chapter 2 or?
No, we've got another 3 pages.
All right.
But yeah, like Kamala Harris is vice president, for example, because, she is just as anti-proletarian as all the white men.
I mean, she's a cop, so
Yeah.
What? Don't
She's a,
don't you ever shit talk my girl boss? What the fuck are you talking about? Get the fuck out of here. Yes, Kwame. Let's see. All right, so you got 3 pages left. So that's because
something like that. Where the hell were we? Do you want to continue reading, or do you want someone else to pick up?
I'm good to continue reading. Most of the wealthy business directors who sit on the boards of media corporations are unknown to the public. Otherwise, however, are famous media tycoons such as the late Henry Luce, William Randolph Hearst, William Randolph Hearst Jr., Walter Annenberg, and Rupert Murdoch. Consider the last mentioned. Rupert Murdoch, an Australian, owns newspapers in major cities throughout that country, including Australia's only national daily, along with television stations, publishing houses, record companies, and a major airline. In Great Britain, Murdoch owns the London Times and the London Sunday Times, 2 sex and scandal sheets with combined circulation of over 8 million. A string of special interest magazines, provincial newspapers, and paper manufacturing, printing, and newspaper transport firms. In the United States, the the inexorable Murdoch has gained control of the New York Post, New York Magazine, including Q, the Village Voice, the Chicago Sun Times, and 2 dailies and some 17 suburban weeklies in Texas. By 1985, he was in the process of buying Metro Media's 7 television stations in New York, Boston, and other major cities, giving him access to 21% of the U.S. viewing audience.
Jesus.
According, yeah, it's like nearly a quarter. Or it's
Yeah.
like, Jesus.
Yeah. It's a fifth. That's wild.
Yeah. Well, yeah. According to its 1981 annual report, the News Corporation Ltd., the parent corporation of Murdoch's empire, earned over $1 billion. Murdoch's own after-tax profits were $51.6 million. Like Annenberg, Luce, I'm not sure, and other media owners, Murdoch is a political conservative. His newspapers in Australia, Great Britain, and the United States, with 1 or 2 exceptions, back right-wing political candidates like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and advocate strong pro-business, anti-labor, anti-welfare state, and anti-communist views. Many voices, one chorus. While having an abundance of numbers and giving an appearance of diversity, the mass media are actually highly centralized outlets that proffer a remarkably homogenized fare. News services for dailies throughout the entire nation are provided by the Associated Press, United Press International, which may soon merge with AP or go under, the New York Times and Los Angeles Times, Washington Post wire services, and several foreign wire services like Reuters. The ideological viewpoint of these news conduits are pretty much the same, quote, marked by a prefabricated standardization of news which is constricting and frightening, unquote. A growing portion of newspaper space is given over to soft rather than hard news, to trivialized features and gossip items, to celebrities in the limelight, to crime, scandal, and sensationalism. Television, radio, and newspaper coverage of national and local affairs is usually scant, superficial, and oriented towards events and personalities, consisting of a few short headline stories and a number of conservative or simply banal commentaries and editorials. The same right-wing commentators such as Evans, Novak, George Will, William Buckley, and James Kilpatrick, along with an occasional centrist or liberal like Joseph Kraft or Tom Wicker, appear in papers coast to coast the same day. Many dailies in the smaller cities published canned editorials and political cartoons supplied by the, quote, syndicated word factories, unquote. Now this is another quote. Pouring into the editorial offices every day from the syndicates are pictures, news features, women's features, drawings, maps, cartoons, sports columns, political commentary, advice to the lovelorn, modernized for a swinging generation, horoscopes, farm advice, stamp and coin columns, dressmaking guides, household hints, book reviews, and film and theater criticism, unquote. Whichever newspaper one reads or television station one views in whatever part of the United States, one is struck by the indistinguishable and immediately familiar quantity of the news and views presented and of the people presenting them. One confronts a pre-cooked, controlled, centralized national news industry that is in sharp contrast to the pluralistic diversity of opinion that is said to prevail in the United States. To think that information and viewpoints circulate in a free market of ideas is to conjure up a misleading metaphor. A quote-unquote market suggests a place of plenitude, with the consumer moving from stall to stall as at any bazaar, sampling and picking from an array of wares. But the existing media market of ideas is more like the larger economic market of which it is a part. Oligopolistic? I have no idea how you pronounce that. But
You got it.
Okay. Standardized and most accessible to those who possess vast amounts of capital or who hold views that are pleasing to the possessors of capital. To be sure, in this controlled market, there is a vast array of publications for motorcycle owners, dog owners, and homeowners, for brides and singles, for fishing, hunting, dating, for camping and gardening, for weight watching and weightlifting, for karate and judo, for sailing, swimming, and jogging, for auto mechanics, auto racing, and horse raising, for music fans, movie fans, television fans, soap opera devotees, and computer fanatics, for just about every conceivable diversion and taste. Relatively few of these have anything to do with meaningful political and social affairs. Most are devoted to mass media distractions and mass market consumerism. The diversity of publications, both serious and trivial, should not be mistaken for a plurality of ideas and ideologies, nor wealth of political information. As one group of scholars noted after an extensive study, protection against government is now not enough to guarantee that a person who has something to say shall have a chance to say it. The owners and managers of the press determine which person, which facts, which version of the facts, and which ideas shall reach the public. Is it all economics? More than a century ago, Karl Marx observed that those who control the material means of production also controlled the mental means of production. So in every epoch, the ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. Indeed, it seems so today. Viewpoints supported by money have no trouble gaining mass exposure and sympathetic media treatment, while those offensive to moneyed interests languish either for want of the costly sums needed to reach a vast public, or because of the prohibitions exercised by media owners and management. In a word, the mass media are a class-dominated media bound by the parameters of ownership in a capitalist society. The media play a twofold role. While seen as something apart from business, they actually are a big business. But like the quote-unquote non-profit churches, universities, law schools, professional associations, arts and political parties, the media are an institution. The media also are an institution geared for ideological control. Their role is to reproduce the conditions of social and class stability, to carry out the monopoly management of image and information, but in such a way as to engineer an appearance of class neutrality and an appearance of independence from the corporate class that owns them. Shit, that seems significant.
Yeah.
Some persons would deny that oligopolistic ownership fosters a uniformity of ideas. They argue that even if the media do show a concentration of ownership, this does not explain everything about their content, for mass communication is influenced by an array of social, cultural, and physiological or psychological forces. For instance, the professional values of journalists ensure a good deal of independence in the media. To focus exclusively on economic factor is to lapse into a simplistic, materialist reductionism. Economic power is not everything, the argument goes. No one says economic power is everything, but it is quite a lot. And having taken note of the other factors, need we then hastily dismiss the material and ideological class interests that result from capitalist ownership and control, as do more orthodox writers who prefer to blame the media's quote-unquote shortcomings on inept reporters and ignorant public and cultural biases? Social experience is no less economic because it is also culturally and psychological. Life does not come in neatly divided and mutually exclusive subject areas as do academic departments. The cultural, or the quote-unquote cultural, is not something to be counterposed as distinct from and competitive with the economic. How could there not be a linkage between cultural and economic interests? How could there be a viable society in which the two were chronically apart and opposed to each other? Most things are simultaneously cultural and economic. An automobile, a television advertisement, a board of trustees, a cosmetic kit, and a toolkit are all cultural and economic. The technology, commodities, services, institutions, and systems of ownership and command have both a cultural and economic dimension, and for that matter, a psychological one as well. Indeed, it would be hard to imagine any of the dimensions existing in a context devoid of the others. This does not mean they operate with perfect coordination, but it is time we stopped thinking about them as being mutually exclusive and conceptually competitive. Economic power does not automatically translate into cultural hegemony, but it makes such hegemony much more likely. Those who own the media must make conscious efforts in selecting the right managers and editors and setting down proper guidelines and permissible boundaries so that they might exercise maximum control with a minimum of direct and naked intervention. More on this in the next chapter.
Let's get a W in the chat for how good a job Fablewick did with this reading, y'all. They did a great job. So, yeah, there's a lot to go over. So, like, one of the interesting things that was being like floated out there as you were doing your reading, and me and Zoe like strongly like or not strongly but like briefly like mentioned it, was like this idea that like there is not even what constitute like real diversity in a practical sense in the media, right? So like we have, I can name any number of, for example, right now, black CNN anchors, whether it be, Don Lemon, who else is a minority on there? I'm drawing a blank. Van Jones is sometimes on there, but Monty Sellers, he sometimes makes appearances, etc. But these aren't necessarily people who are drawing revolutionary conclusions. Oftentimes, they are drawing not necessarily reactionary conclusions, but they're drawing the conclusions of their white cohorts in a way that does not necessarily divorce them like from the apparatus that like the institution they represent, in their case CNN, has in place. So like they'll have more or less the same perspective on issues of imperialism, issues of colonialism. They'll probably be totally in sync on anti-communism, etc. And so, like, on one thing I'm like interested in seeing is like if he goes into talking about exactly who this perceived diversity is meant to be marketed at, because like clearly as like a black queer person, I'm meant to like watch CNN, see Don Lemon, another black queer person, and say to myself, "Oh, I'm being represented." Because like there's like this handsome light skinned black queer that's just like me, even though like ideologically we're not similar at all. And so it's just the case that we got to be real careful with making sure that we understand that the perspective has to be diverse in order for there to be any kind of diversity that can be even bragged about in any kind of meaningful way. And what we see oftentimes in the media is not at all a diverse perspective. It's very much, the same logic of, imperialism, but make it woke, the girl boss logic, that kind of horseshit. So Comrade Dictionary said, after the parade of W's for our esteemed Comrade Fibwick, economic power does not automatically translate into cultural hegemony, but it makes such hegemony much more likely. Those who own the media must make conscious efforts in selecting the right managers and editors and setting down proper guidelines and permissible boundaries so that they might exercise maximum control with the minimum of direct and naked intervention. This is a much better way of putting what I wrote. This is such a good passage. That is really good passage. So, like, one thing, and I particularly note it from secular talk, but really, it's the sentiment is out there from all of these so-called new media or alternate media, or whether you want to call it the terminally online media outlets. The framing that they have about what the problem with mainstream media is fundamentally off. Because they'll use, so like, it's not fundamentally off from that they don't understand the problem, because like they understand that like these people are like not reporting the news from any kind of like working class perspective. That part they definitely get, but their framing of the problem seems to be like, oh, it's because they're weak, it's because they're beholden, it's because they are something other than people who got hired in to do a narrative. Like, it is not, well, I was going to say it's not a moral failing that these people do their job in the way that they do it, but it is, because the question is imperialism, and like not reporting on imperialism in a working class way is definitely unethical. But at the same time, ethics don't play into why they do what it is they do. They're not getting on there with any, I'm going to purposely underreport and undersell the consequences of imperialism, colonialism, bourgeois electoralism, liberalism, etc. Like, it is not a smoke-filled back room to craft narratives that these people are engaged in. These are their actual perspectives. These are real people who believe real things. Now, what Kyle does get right, he often cites that, like, these people only get hired in if they agree with, like, the perspectives that were already in place in that establishment when they interviewed for the job in the first place. But it's then a contradiction to say that, like, that's the case and these people are, like, weak or whatever other horseshit, you know, machismo, like strongman logic, or descriptors rather you want to use to describe like these people's character. Like, that's not interesting, and also it can't even really be the case that that's the problem if all they're really doing is representing their class interest, because these people are oftentimes petit bourgeois, or at the very least, if they're not petit bourgeois, they're exactly the labor aristocracy that we so talk about. These are the well-paid, high-moneyed interest. And while they do not necessarily own means of production, it's very much the case that, like, those who do own the means of production pay them well to get this narrative out. So, like, they're not weak or anything like that. They're
they understand
logical.
exactly what they need to do to keep their cushy position.
Exactly. They're acting totally logical and totally rational. And, like, that's the entire problem. That's the entire problem. Yeah. The esteemed Comrade Dictionary says, the system as it exists today is a well-oiled machine. Much of the control mechanisms in place just work now without needing the direct guiding hand of ownership class. Exactly. Like, it is not hard for me to go out randomly into society, close my eyes, spin around in a heavily populated area, and like somehow land with my finger pointed at somebody who has the same perspectives as these people in the media, AKA, it's not hard to find liberal-minded, pro-imperialist, pro-establishment people. These people necessarily do come out from a society where they do reflect the attitudes of many of the populace. Like, somebody like Kamala Harris doesn't get to their position and doesn't enjoy the online popularity that they have, divorced from the conditions and the actual perspectives of people. I mean, there was even a time in my life before I was more politically educated where I would have probably worked for Kamala's campaign directly. I was going into 2019 having a real contradiction and this was before I became a communist, where I became a communist at the end of 2019. My whole thing was trying to decide if I was going to re-up with Bernie and work for his campaign again, or if I was going to go ahead and offer my services up to Kamala, thinking like, because I was buying into the rhetoric. She was the most progressive senator, even more than Bernie. And, like, necessarily that would inform what my perspectives even were at the time. And there's a lot of people who are like still in the mindset that I would have had at that time. And those exact kind of people are exactly the sort of folks who end up with the cushy positions that Zoe was just mentioning on CNN, on MSNBC, on MSNBC, and yes, on Fox too. Because people got to understand that, like, as reactionary as Fox News is, there isn't a meaningful difference on questions of imperialism between your average anchor at Fox and your average anchor at the so-called more liberal establishment. They might be more brazen about, the pro-war agenda, and you'll get like Fareed Zakaria, I think that's how you pronounce his name, every now and then making like a somewhat anti-war stance. But like, there's a reason whenever you hear anything that even sounds like anti-war on CNN, it comes off as a surprise, because we all know what the actual perspective is on questions of war. We all know who manufactures consent for these wars in the first place, and we know, like Zoe said, that they know exactly what they have to do. So like, they're not paid off or beholden or anything along those lines. These are just their perspectives, and they got hired, to share those perspectives. It's not different than like us bringing people who into bread theory who already have the same ideological disposition, generally speaking, even if there's like, substantive differences in terms of like action plans and shit like that. So we got to keep that shit in mind. Yeah, we got some pretty decent reading done, and chapter 3 is a long
On
one.
the very topic we were just discussing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, chapter 3 is on the very topic we're just discussing. So I think it would be good to leave chapter 3 for next week, and we'll resume at this time. So we're gonna get this edited, put up on YouTube in the next few days. As always, I appreciate you, comrades, for joining us. We will be resuming on Monday with chapter 2 of Neo-colonialism. Definitely bring your notepad, because Neo-colonialism by Nkrumah is definitely a data-driven,
dense text.
Yeah, dense analytical text, but like, we have to read it. So we'll be continuing with Neo-colonialism Monday, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa Tuesday, Women, Race, and Class, another rough one, which I will definitely be issuing trigger warnings for on Wednesday. And next Thursday, there's an announcement y'all can be looking forward to from us Bread Theory mods, but I won't say anything more. I'll just whet the appetite, so to speak. But until then, y'all, love you, comrades, and ta-ta for now.